Hi, I'm Jennifer Jill Araya.
And I'm Sarah Beth Goer.
Welcome to the Crafting Audiobooks podcast, where we discuss the art and craft of audiobooks, and we aim to go deep quick.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for being here. Excited to welcome our guest for today, Erin Mallon, narrator and author. Erin, thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me. I'm very excited.
Well, we are a podcast that likes to go deep quick, so we're going to dive straight into the first question, which is, could you please share with us how the craft of narration influences your writing and how your writing craft influences your narration?
Sure. So I have been narrating as long as I've been writing, but I am a playwright as well as now a novelist. So people that know me as a narrator, they think the writing is new usually because I put out my first book in 2020. And I've been narrating. My very first book was in 2010. And then it took a couple years until I could really call it full time. But so I do like to tell people the writing is not new, but I've been doing it in a completely different medium for theater. So when I started writing novels, it was interesting. People have been asking me for a few years, you narrate all these romantic comedies and you write all these comedic plays. When are you going to write a romantic comedy novel? And at the time I was all cheeky and I'm like, I'm not. Like I had no plans to do that. And I don't know why. I think maybe just life felt full, or it still does, thankfully. Or I just had so much respect for the amazing authors that I get to work for all the time. So I felt a little funny, kind of like edging over there and trying to do it too. And now I know there's room for all of us. And if you have an impulse to create something, that you should try it. But that said, I wrote my first book. It was called Flirtosaurus, and it's a rom-com. And in hindsight, so now it's been almost 5 years, I was absolutely writing as a narrator. Even though I have all this experience as a writer, I didn't have experience as an author yet. So I think it's a great and fun book, and I love for people to listen to it. My style has changed since then, because back then I knew I was narrating it. So I wrote it for myself to perform, which is great because you know you're going to perform it the way you want it to be done. But it was absolutely written for an audio experience to the extreme, so that I think people that were eyeball reading it would have a little difficulty. And I didn't even realize that at the time. And so when it came time for my second book, I really found a way, I think, to let both worlds have a great experience, whether they're listening or reading with your eyes. But I do think it's a plus. It is really, I think, cool that I do have an audio mindset as I'm writing, because I want, whether I'm narrating or I'm handing it over to someone else, or it's a multicast, I want it to feel alive. I want it to feel like it was always meant to be inhabited by a human voice. Sometimes you can read like a glorious piece of literary fiction, beautiful prose, like perfection. And it can be challenging to narrate because you know that person never meant for it to be spoken. It's supposed to be a person in their chair by themselves, having these long sentences, all these things. So I think being a narrator, I think narrators tend to be good writers if they've studied writing and if they have a knack for it, because we live inside these little boxes all day telling stories. We know what it's like. We know when a story is popping off the page and when we have to sort of like coax it out and like breathe extra life into it. Both can be really enjoyable, but now how being an author affects my narrating, I don't know. I just have a real respect for authors because I knew it was hard to write a book. Now I know how hard it is to write a book. So anytime someone comes my way and wants me to be their narrator, I always write them an email afterwards and thank them for putting their trust in me, because it's a big deal. And I know that we all take it very seriously and playfully. But Yeah, I'm so grateful to do both. People ask me all the time, which do you love more? And will you still narrate? Like they got nervous when I started publishing books because they're like, are you going to stop narrating? I'm like, no. Why are you guys kicking me out? No. They feed each other. So I want them both.
I love that. So you mentioned for your first novel that at the time you didn't realize that you were truly writing it for audio only and that you weren't creating that positive experience for eyeball readers. I would love to know what allowed you to realize, hey, that's what I'm doing and I need to find more of a middle ground going forward. When did you realize that?
Uh, when a few people started to tell me in reviews and things like that,
Okay.
not unkindly, but there would be reviews like, "I bet this is a great audio read. I see she's a narrator herself." I was confused sometimes about who was talking. It was a technical thing, like when you're reading a book, when you're narrating a book, and there's so many dialogue tags. He said, she said, but also he said slyly, she said thisly. When there's too much of that, it's interesting as the narrator because I'm going to infuse that slyness into the delivery, but then I also have to say he said slyly, and it feels like too much. And so it's tricky. So in my book, I didn't want any of that. And being that I come from the theater, you don't have tags. So you always know who's talking because you see the person on the stage, but the language has to be infused with the feeling and the intention so much so that the actor knows how to perform it. And so I think Fleur de Source is theatrical. That's what I think it is. But I don't know that it's literary. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
And so when it came time for the next book, I just really thought about that. One, making it absolutely clear with necessary tags who's speaking, um, but keeping that theatricality that I love, letting the dialogue really pop. I'm a very dialogue heavy writer because that's what I love. I describe to the point that I have to, and that it's fun, scenes and who's wearing what and what people look like. But dialogue, pop and dialogue is what excites me.
And that makes so much sense that then you started or your primary writing medium has been as a playwright.
Yeah.
A meta theme that's striking me as you share about this is I love the way like you seem to have sort of this light yet serious energy around like, well, I let the learning inform, like, like I'm always growing. This teaches me this, that teaches me that. Oh, I got feedback and then I, thought about it, incorporated it, that there's like a dedication to it, but also a lightness.
Oh,
Yeah, which mirrors what you were saying, like you said something earlier about, oh yeah, like taking the work seriously, but playfully, like, and I'm sensing and hearing that energy, and it's just I find it to be a very inspiring, creative approach.
well, thank
Um,
you. And it kind of takes balls to do that publicly. You know, we all want to feel like these finished-esque projects, like these fully realized artists. But if we're still here and we're still creating, what are we doing if we're not expanding and adjusting and experimenting? And you have to find a way to do that while sharing your work with the public, which comes with criticism and criticism and praise, back and forth and back and forth. And you kind of have to live somewhere in the middle of those two, listening, be appreciating, but not taking either of those too deeply to heart because that's not a good road. I think believing your hype or believing your critics, neither are too good.
right, because both end up resulting in something other than, hey, I'm showing up and doing my most authentic work and playing and engaging and exploring and growing. Because the hype leads to like, I'm so amazing, I don't have any growing left to do, and the criticism leads to like, I'm not enough, I need to shrink, I need to change, I need to try to please, I need to, etc.
Yes. And there's way too much of that, I think, particularly for female artists. I'll speak for myself. I was talking to my daughter about this morning. She's 7. And she asked me Oh, because I had just played the Kendrick Lamar halftime show for my family, and we were talking about the symbolism of it and different things. And there's the song where he says, "Sit down, be humble. Sit down, be humble." And my 7-year-old said, "What, mommy? What's humble?" And I was like, "Wow!" And I was trying to define it. It was a hard thing to define, um, but I needed to talk about it specifically with her in a very specific way, because being humble is a beautiful, wonderful thing. But you also need to know when you are not allowing yourself to step fully into what is for you. And I think, especially when you're talking to a little girl, I mean, when I was young, I heard a lot like, don't toot your own horn, don't be too big for your britches. And if like something really good creatively would happen, there would be a couple girls on the playground that would be upset. And so I'm trying to teach her that the people who care about you will be happy for you. And there's a way that you can be confident without pushing that on other people, you know? And it's like an inside job. So, yeah, a lot of conversations in this house.
That's beautiful.
It also strikes me that this is just very much about finding that middle of the road where you're not too much of any one thing, but rather settling into who you truly are, not
Yeah.
buying into someone else's vision. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And even it's funny just to hear you like that word, that phrase too much. You meant it a certain way.
Right.
Sometimes we hear it in a different way, like, oh,
Yeah.
she's too much. And it's like, well, too much what? If I'm being authentic, if I'm being myself, if we're not hurting anyone, like I don't think we can ever be too much.
Agreed.
Right?
Agreed. Yeah. Being too much of yourself is not possible, but taking
Yeah.
too much of someone else into you is possible.
Yes. Very possible. Very. Yes.
Deep philosophical discussion, my goodness. Well, I would love to pivot a little bit in our conversation. So you said that you started writing first, but then you started narrating. And I would love for you to kind of go back to that very beginning of your narration journey and share some of the first key principles that you learned about the craft of narration that have really influenced who you are as a narrator now.
Well, so like I said, my first book was in 2010, and it was a young adult book. And at the time, I thought that's was going to be my path. And it's been, I would say, 75% romance, my career. And I'm very happy there. That's really where I love to be. Up until that point, I'd been acting on stages. I had been working as an actor. And so I studied with Paul Rubin, who's wonderful. And he said to me what he said to most people in that first workshop, which is less, less. Did you study with him too?
Oh,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. And he would talk about how you are bringing this experience literally into someone's ear. Like it is so intimate. And I was so happy that he was my first teacher, because laying the groundwork for that intimacy and that connection with a listener was so important, because I think you can get on this weird path where you think you're performing a one-man show every week. In some ways you are, but it's if you're thinking about yourself, and this is what I learned really quickly, if you're thinking about yourself, you're not bringing forth the story, and you're not connected to the author's vision, what the author wants to communicate. So I always get a little wary when I hear people really hyping up the performance of this book. I'm like, that's cool. Is it a flashy book? Is it supposed to be like, that's great. And I love seeing people get accolades. But I often pause and wonder, did the story come through? Were you thinking about the narrator the whole time? Or were you immersed in the story? And it's just a little tightrope that we have to walk. And I learned that early on. When you're nervous and you're thinking about yourself so much, you're like, nope, reconnect to the text, reconnect to the story. I'm just this lucky little channel to get the story out. And it takes off some of the pressure. And I think creativity flows better from that place. So yeah, Paul Rubin was very helpful in the beginning. Very, very, very helpful.
What you had to share reminds me of our conversation, the interview that we had with Robin Whitten of Audiophile magazine. And she was sharing that her favorite audiobooks are the ones where she completely forgets that the narrator even exists because
Love it.
everything is in the world of the story.
Love
And,
it.
the narrator has done their job in her estimation when you don't even think about the narrator because they're so one with that story. And that
Mm-hmm.
makes me think of that.
Well, when in those early days, I did a lot more in studio recordings with directors and stuff. And now I do that still, but I would say at least 50, 60% is me at home by myself. Um, but I remember learning early on too that there were kind of two schools of thought, at least back then. Um, I could tell right away, oh, they want this kind of multicast feel. They want to feel like there's literally 8 people in the room around this table and bop, bop, bop. They want that. And then there'd be the other directors that wanted more of that subtle approach, um, telling a story around a campfire kind of approach. And it was cool to learn how to be flexible and see what story needs what approach. And that comes at you hard and fast when you're first starting. You're like, oh my God, how will I ever figure it out? And then as you know, you do enough books, you start to trust your instincts more, and the book talks to you so you can talk through the book.
Incredibly well put. Yes. I just want to take a moment, like Jennifer doesn't know I'm about to say this, but speaking of that experience of like the narrator disappears, I just want to plug a title that Jennifer did. It was called Annie Bot, and it is just a freaking incredible book and an incredible performance. And like Jennifer is a very close friend and my podcast co-host, and yet I was still experiencing Annie Bot, and I actually can't even tell you in this moment. Like I'm pretty sure it's written in third person, but it felt like first person because just Annie Bot was like living in
Love
my head.
it.
So I just want to, it's one of my favorite listens I've ever listened to. So I'm just taking a moment to plug that right
No, love it.
Yeah. That was
Ladies lifting up ladies. It's good.
now.
actually, yeah, Annie is a robot, but she's one of the most human characters and most fully realized human characters I've ever had the joy of narrating.
It's
Oh,
So
so
she's a
good.
robot. Yeah. And she very clearly is a robot. Like that's her character. But yeah, her
yeah,
humanity is deep. Thank you, Sarah.
love it.
So if anyone wants to listen to an example of what I think is the narrator fades away and the world comes to life, there you go.
Especially when, as you said, when you know someone so well and you care about your friend and you want them to do great. So there's probably elements of like, listen to her go, like, oh, you're happy for her. So, but to disappear like that into the story, it's quite a feat.
Yeah, I'm like, she's not even a stranger to me. Like I know her really well, and she's still Annie Bot. So I am wondering about your process of developing character voices. We've talked about how dialogue is so exciting to you as a writer,
Mhm.
and then the character voices come to life in the dialogue. What is your process of developing those character voices, and what influences how you choose to voice any given character?
Well, for me, it's 100% in the text, in the dialogue. Yes, I scour the whole document I read the whole book, but then I'm scouring and taking notes on specific things said about that voice. So, of course, if we've got a constant, like the guy's growling, the woman is husky, we need to honor that. But I think even more important is the point of view that character is coming from. It's easy to get carried away sometimes and just to be trying to make these different, distinct, exciting voices, but does it really line up with who that person is? So I'm always asking myself that question. And I had a funny experience the other day. I'm doing a co-narration with Alistair Hainsbridge, and I was recording first. So I was working on things and I was making some files, but before I even gave him the files, he reached out and was like, what are you thinking for these voices? And so I fired off just a quick description of the 6 main characters. And so it was something like, Rafe, he's really dark and he's always in this mood. And so I'm kind of placing him here and I'm adding a little bit of a snarl to some things. And I did that kind of thing for 6 characters. And he wrote back and he's like, this is weird, but that is exactly what I was thinking. And I believed him. And I think that comes from great writing that gave us exactly what we needed. So I rarely feel like I'm over here making things up. What I do feel like I'm doing is taking the story and then placing the characters where the authors already told me they belong through their interactions with other characters. So, you all do the same?
Yeah, I don't think I would have phrased it that way though, but that's a really beautiful way of putting it that, yes, there are those dialogue descriptors that we get for how a voice sounds. As you were talking about that part, I was thinking of a book that I've mentioned on a different podcast episode where one of the characters was described as sounding like a foghorn, like very descriptive,
Oh, good Lord.
very descriptive vocal characteristics sometimes, but also the way that the characters interact with each other is the author telling us how they sound. And that is so perceptive, and I would not have phrased it that way, but I love that.
Isn't it fun having a podcast? Because then I'm not going to tell you why it's fun to have a podcast, but you just hear everyone's different descriptions of the same thing that we're all doing, and we're all just taking tidbits from each other.
Yes, it's extremely exciting. It was our vision for the podcast is like, what if we got to chat about the craft, but then like we could share that with the community because probably other people want to hear us all chat about the craft. And I'm very excited about it, as you can tell from how my voice just went just now.
It's very cool.
The excitable character of Sarah that you could tell from the writing was meant to. Yeah. I have two follow-up thoughts about that. And one is that if I were a beginner narrator listening to this, I'd be like, but okay, so the author told me how the voice is supposed to, what do I do like with my body to like make the voice? Like, what are you talking about? And I have thoughts on that, but I would love to hear, like, Erin, what would you say to a beginner narrator who's like, but what am I supposed to do now? Like, okay, I kind of got what the characters, what do I do to produce it through my body? I don't know what you mean.
Yeah, I would start by saying that this is, again, like less thinking about yourself and more immersing yourself in the story. It's not all about how the character sounds. So I think most people think when they're beginning vocal placement, where are we placing them pitch wise? That's mostly, I think, what people are thinking about. But then there's rhythm and there's cadence and there's like the speed of characters' thoughts. So that teaches me a lot. If someone is talking, they could be an excitable person. They could also be a very sad person who never gets listened to, so they have to speak quickly because they know someone's going to talk over them really fast. So it all comes back to character study for me, like character analysis. That said, there's posture. When I sit very tall in my booth, how does the breath flow through me? How do I speak? I've noticed when I'm working on a guy voice, something happens with my eyes, like my eyes droop a little bit, like something, and my posture automatically, I was just thinking about it, my back rounded a little bit. So there's things that are going to naturally happen to your body as you experiment. I think newer narrators should experiment a lot, what they think they're doing, and then listen back what actually came through. So I think you should experiment, but then also I think you should play. What happens if I do this? What happens if I do that? If I make this face? If I scrunch up my shoulders? If I get so relaxed it's ridiculous? Like, what happens? So I just encourage people to play as much as you can. You feel serious, it's very important to you, but play. In the beginning, that very first book, it was so funny. It was for Audible, and Mike Charzak said to me, okay, Erin, you got to bring your A game. This is a big book. You got to bring your A game. And I was like, I don't know if I have a B game, a C game, a D game. Like, it was my first book. Excuse me. So it felt very serious. And I remember at that first session, the engineer said to me after like the first chapter, you're breathing kind of funny. Are you okay? And I'm like, I'm just nervous. Like, I was so nervous. And I was like, yeah, I'm okay. And I was just trying to bring my A game. And then the day went on and it was great. And I got the hang of it. And at the end of the day, he was so kind. He said, would you like to go back and do that first chapter again? I was like, I absolutely would. Thank you. So you have to balance that nervous energy with the playful energy and experiment within reason, I think.
Yeah, I think it's helpful. Like, I'm not sure bring your A game is the most helpful direction
I don't
to
think
give.
Yeah.
Of course not. Of course not. Without, but it can be if the guidance is like bring your A game means like trust yourself.
Yes. Yes.
I think that's, yeah, an incredible description for not just narrators who are starting out, like even veteran narrators, like let's pause and take a day and like play around and explore like what you know facets of my body, of how my voice can emerge, have I not discovered yet. And I've found that like by very mindfully doing that as a beginner narrator, being like, I don't know, and playing and listening back and playing and listening back, like it gets to a point eventually where now voices will just, like I just think about the character and a voice will emerge from me and I'll be like, oh, cool, thanks, body. Like, I don't know. But it for me, it was helpful to like have more conscious practices at the beginning, and then they integrated over time. But it can still be good to go like make them conscious again and play consciously to expand my range and ability as well.
And you also have to know, like, if for Jennifer, you're saying the voice is a foghorn, I'm assuming that was a minor character.
Not actually a very minor character. He was the servant of the main character. So like anytime that she was in the scene, he was there too. But this was also a very young middle grade book. So like a chapter children's book or a really young middle grade book. And so all of the character voices were like super extreme, and it was very playful and silly, and nothing was serious. So yeah, there was a lot of foghorn. Now the whole book was probably only like 4 or 5 hours, so even with him being in a lot of scenes, it wasn't very much.
Well, I was going to say, if the author says what the author wants to say, but if they said that like the hero of the book had a voice like a foghorn, and I was voicing this hero, this romantic hero, I would try to give them a hint of foghorn, but I would try to also be their friend as the narrator and know that a true foghorn is unsustainable for 10 hours to someone's ear. So I would try to help them out a little bit by bridging that gap. Just a little bit of horn, but not too much.
Yeah, and that speaks to experience. I love that dialogue you two just had because it speaks to having a certain level of experience with different genres, with having sort of listened, so like, oh yeah, that actually wears on a listener's ears because I've listened to audiobooks and I know that that Jennifer could tell like, oh, for this particular title it's actually appropriate to like go foghorn and play, and for on this other title it like, yeah, you just want to do that hint, and it just takes practice.
Yeah.
I also think if a narrator, or not a narrator, sorry, if an author describes a male main character of a romance as having a voice with like a foghorn, they've never listened to a foghorn.
Right.
Or they have a very idiosyncratic taste of what is sexy.
This is true. Don't yuck someone's yum.
I just one more note about character voices is you were like, that's what's so great about great writing. I don't feel like I'm inventing anything. And I was like, oh, that sounds luxurious. I definitely work on books where I'm absolutely inventing, and I don't disrespect those authors because, like you said, it is such a feat to write a book that like even if the book is missing maybe it could have increased in skill regarding bringing the sort of depth and complexity of the character forth in the text, I still am like honored that I was entrusted with this writer's work. But I do think it takes a little bit more, like I am inventing a little bit more. And if I do just write on like what the book gave me, the characters might come across as a little more bland than serves the story. So that was one other thought that occurred when you said that. I was like, yes, when the writing has that in it, that's true.
Well, I think that comes full circle to what we started with, is talking about when authors are writing with audio in mind. That rarely happens, I find. Like the authors that I know are very dedicated to audiobooks. They love them. They're connected to the community. They're excited about them. Their books have that vibrancy built in because they're already thinking about it. But I also think there's different kinds of writers in the world, and some want to only paint so much with their words so you can like put yourself on it. They don't want to give you too much description because they want that heroine or that hero to be exactly who you're envisioning and you're hearing. But as the narrator, we have to make some choices regardless. So
I like that very sort of artist supported interpretation, because even if I'm narrating a romance novel and it's not very well written and there are 5 brothers and the author really didn't do much to distinguish the brothers from each other, so far in my career I've been like, yeah, like they lacked technical skill to distinguish the brothers from each other. I need to invent what distinguishes the brothers from each other. And there might be like, I'll scan deeply for hints on the page because there might be like one little minor hint there that I can build off of what the author intended, but like it's not on the page, right? Like that's how I've been conceiving of it. But based on what you just said, like why not embrace the collaboration even further and say like, oh, but with the way it's written now, the reader gets to invent who that brother is completely and utterly. And isn't that juicy in its own way? And as the narrator, yeah, I got to step in and make some choices, but to be in that artist, like instead of being like, well, this was kind of lacking, I'll pick up the slack, to be like, hey, here was this strength, and how do I collaborate with this? Like,
well, you
like
always
that.
have to deal with what's in front of you, right? Doesn't matter what we're working on. We could always wish it was a little different. This is what it is. So how is this particular text and story and situation going to bounce off what is particular about me? And then if that book had been handed off to one of you, it would be a different experience. And like, how can we let that give us freedom? You were cast. You were cast. You are the right person for the book. It is yours. Now take it and do authentically what you do with it. And I think that is just so darn cool.
I completely agree. I love
Yeah.
it. Well, believe it or not, we are already on our final question, which all 3 of us will answer. And Sarah, I would love for you to go first this time around. What is exciting to you about the craft of audiobooks right now, today?
Well, my answer is rather simple but rich today, I think, which is like, I'm just excited that our job is to come meet this writer's project and express ourselves. Like our job is to come into the booth and self-express and connect with the listener. Like you said, Erin, that it's a very intimate experience in this one person's ear. Like my job is to come connect as a human, like express myself as a human, connect as a human. Like just how cool is that? That's like what we do every day. Like what? So that's what I'm excited about.
I love it. We do get to do something really awesome.
What about you, Jennifer? What's exciting for you today?
Sure. So at this exact moment when we're recording this interview, I am working on a number of projects kind of all at once that are all really true collaborations. And not all books are like that. In fact, I would dare say that most of my projects are not. It's the producer, the casting director sending me the manuscript, and then I sort of take it and run. And that's kind of, a solo creative endeavor in some ways. But right now I've got 2 different authors that I'm working directly with the authors, not through a intermediary. And both of them are super involved in the development process for their audiobook in a very positive way. I will say sometimes it can be difficult if the authors are micromanaging, but that's not happening in either of these cases. They're really wanting to partner with me as I start making these decisions and get ready to record their book soon. And then I'm also working on 2 multicast titles that one I'm recording tomorrow, and the other one I'm recording in a couple of weeks, that have a ton of crossover characters. So lots of conversations with all of my co-narrators. And, we're sending character samples back and forth and finding accent samples for the non-general American accents and discussing evolution of character arts. And I can say that I wouldn't want to take on 100% projects that are this collaboration intensive because it takes a lot of time, frankly. But right now, I am just really loving the collaboration of these particular projects. It's joyful to work with some creatives whose work I really admire, and I'm getting to partner with them to create these worlds. And yeah, so I'm just sinking into the joy that can exist in the collaboration that sometimes happens when the audiobook requires it. And that's where I am right now. Yeah.
Love it.
Mm-hmm.
I would expand that to the joy of the collaboration of these conversations.
Oh, gosh, yes, absolutely. Erin, what about you? What is exciting you about audiobooks today?
Mine's kind of similar to yours, Jennifer, in that So like I said, I write for the theater, and one of my very favorite things to do in the theater is to write for specific actors, even if they won't ultimately be the people that are in like the world premiere. As I'm writing it, I'm thinking of them and their voice, and it makes my writing more specific. And now I'm starting to play a little bit with in the audiobook world. I feel like we've come to this place that's more flexible with how we're telling stories. And so many of us have been doing this for so long that we're very flexible with doing multicasts and dual narration and duet narration and solo narration. Like recently, Kaylee Loring, who's a great romance author, she wanted to do something to help the fires in California. And she has a book called Sleeper that she released, I believe, in 2020 as a dual narration, two narrators. And that was great. And it was set in the Palisades. And she's like, well, what if I now do a new version of it, a special edition called the Palisades Edition, and do it as a multicast, and all the proceeds for the first month will go to help people affected by the fires. And so we were able to put this together so quickly. Four of us did it as a multicast, got it finished so quickly, added music to it, got it out there. And it raised all this money within the first week. And had we gone through regular channels, it probably wouldn't have come out for 6 months. But I think it was able to happen because so many of us now are flexible and confident and know how to play, like on the fly. And so I was thinking about these people involved, and I'm like, I could just be writing anything, anytime, writing it for their voices and get it up fast. It doesn't have to be this big, long process. So it's sort of what we talked about before, too, but I'm excited about bringing theatricality into the audiobook world and letting those two energies kind of dance with each other.
Oh, absolutely. There's so much possibility within the craft form that is audiobooks, and it's really exciting. Really exciting.
And what an amazing project you all put together. That's exciting, too.
Well, Erin, thank you so much for this conversation. This was truly a delight, and we went to some really deep, impactful places discussing the craft, and I appreciate your willingness to go deep with us and discuss the craft of audiobooks.
Yeah, thanks for having me, friends. It was awesome.
Thanks so much for listening to Crafting Audiobooks. We've been your hosts, Jennifer Jill Araya
And Sarah Beth Goer.
wishing you happy audiobook listening and/or crafting.
Bye for now.